So you've got your big lathe, and you got a new tool for hollowing that needs a pretty sizable blank, but you can't find a piece of wood that big anywhere. I decided to quit whining and just build part of a tree so I can try my new tool. Went to my scrap bin, found some boards, and I cut them up and glued them up and put them in clamps for 48 hours. And no, this narrow board isn't a mistake. In fact, there's one just like it on the other side of the stack. Long before we actually get this blank rounded, that difference in width will be gone. I always let it glue up this big drive for 48 hours to be sure that it's dry in the middle. I like excitement as much as the next person, but I don't need something like this blowing up while I'm turning it. Then I use my centering tape to find the center of mass on either end. I know this might not be exact, but lacking any square corners to work off of, it works pretty well. And I always do this on both ends. Then I put my awl on that mark and thump it a couple of times to give myself a starting point. Next I want to set the drive spur, so I put the piece on the floor, put my spur center where I want it, and then drive it in with the wooden mallet. I know some people set the wood with pressure from the tailstock, but that's wrong, and this is my lathe. Now with the drive spur and the lathe, I set the piece onto it, matching up the marks that we made on the floor, and then I can bring up the tailstock and put it in the center hole on that end. Once I get the point of the live center into that hole we made with the awl, I can go ahead and apply some pressure then. Now we can use some pressure from the tailstock to make sure that the wood is pushed down over the drive spur and is tight between the centers. But that doesn't mean to go nuts with the pressure either. Then I'll start the lathe and bring the RPM up very slowly. I just want to be sure that the piece is set properly and it doesn't have a big wobble to it. And it doesn't. Then I can set the tool rest to make sure that I have a safe gap between it and the workpiece. And then after locking the tool rest down, I'll turn the piece several times to make sure that there's no surprises when I turn the lathe on. Rounding an odd shape like this is going to be tough on the tool, so I make sure that I start out with a good sharp edge. I'm going to start out with my heavy-duty scraper because it's the toughest tool I have and can handle this kind of hammering. I'm starting out with the lathe running about 300-350 RPM. That's plenty of speed for the initial stages of rounding. You just have to take your time when you're doing this kind of rounding. You're making a light cut and advancing the tool very slowly between cuts. We're going to need to stop pretty frequently to change the setup on the tool rest, so it's a good time to check the piece and see how we're doing. The piece is rounding out nicely, and you can see that those narrower pieces of oak on the ends have already rounded out, so that's not an issue anymore. This is about 10 minutes later in the rounding process. We've got it round enough that I can start using my roughing gouge. And while it still bumps some, I can ride the bevel so we can start cleaning this piece up as we're reducing its diameter. This is harder to use than a scraper, but with a little practice it's not bad at all. I'm several more minutes into rounding the piece, and I'm going to start using the gouge at an angle, still riding the bevel. You can make very clean cuts this way. I start on the left side and make a place for me to start the tool so I can go to the right. I suspect that you actually could start this cut at the left edge of the piece, but I've tried that before and scared myself badly. That's why I started several inches into the piece and made a cut to the left. That gives me a flat surface so that I can turn the chisel around and make this cut going to the right. Once you get comfortable making this cut, you can save yourself a whole lot of sanding time. You can remove quite a bit of wood with a cut like this, but if you take your time, make a light cut, riding the bevel all the time, you get a very smooth surface. This is about an hour later, and we have the blank in the chuck. It's been shaped, sanded, and it's ready for the hollowing tool. And because all of this wood came out of my scrap bin, it essentially didn't cost me anything. If we forget about that 140-mile ride anyway.